everyone, welcome back to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, and game masters, and the questers that are Josh and Dan. In reverse, I am Dan.
I am Josh.
And on tonight's podcast, we will be discussing all things quizzical and aroantical, because we have a couple of emails to get to, and then we're going to talk about the great dragon Aban.
Yes.
And that'll be fun. So, before we get to that, and before we get to the emails, let's remind everybody what our email address is in case you want your questions answered by Josh and or me. Take your pick. We'll figure that out. Feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com and pass through those gates. You will get your email read on the air by usually yours truly. Sometimes it comes to Josh and we get it late. We'll go from there. First one comes from Brian. Hi there. Just thought I'd drop in to share a few thoughts again. I really like the idea of the journeyman being more about exploring the ideas of other disciplines than about enhancing their own. That is, you don't become a journeyman or a warrior because you've been thinking how nice it would be to get sprint as a talent. You get it because you want to explore new ideas, and sure, maybe sprint is part of that, or maybe not. But it isn't just, oh look, this talent will make me a more effective warrior. This means it is of great importance that journeyman optional talents count as talents from your discipline. This means that you can inherently spend karma on them, which is not normally the case for journeyman talents and can be quite valuable, but perhaps more importantly, it allows you to buy knacks, which is normally not possible. This is a relatively minor difference for some talents, but it can be very significant for other talents. For example, the Jinx talent in Arcane Mutterings can be quite transformative, changing the talent from a social to a combat effect. As another example, and I feel this would be particularly interesting as an example for Journeyman, Claw Shape can go from being just a way to turn your hand into a weapon to being a way to create useful tools at a moment's notice using the Claw Tool knack. Obviously, you must still meet any requirements listed for a knack, so something limited to another answer is still limited to another answers, for example. But I feel like the option to learn knacks may actually be more significant than the ability to spend karma. Just a few thoughts. Brian. Josh?
Yeah. It kind of reiterates the stuff that we talked about in response to an email a couple of weeks ago where somebody asked the question about talents learned through the journeyman path and whether they can have karma spent on them and so forth. And they are treated, as mentioned, like normal talents through your discipline. So you can spend karma, you can learn knacks if applicable. Yes.
Nice.
More great thoughts on the journeyman. I like that we've been getting a lot of follow-up and discussion about this path because it is so unique and iconoclastic in the way that it approaches things.
I agree. Next one is from Tim, as in the great wizard Tim from, you know Tim?
This is Tim. This is the Tim that I used to play with.
I'm sorry. Fair enough. Don't meet a lot of Tims anymore. Good morning, Dan and Josh. I am still playing catch-up up to episode 87. Email and Earthroot now, but wanted to comment on ogres and their Namegiver status. You can correct me if I am wrong here, but I felt like the implication was that an ogre's Namegiver status was more subjectively social than definitively magical. That they are not Namegivers simply because the established Namegiver races didn't deign permit them that honorific. I think I might have misunderstood what was being stated, since that doesn't seem to jive with either my understanding of what it means to be a Namegiver. The Player's Guide defines Namegivers, quote, the power, imagination, and will to create things by naming them is what makes the races of Barsaive and lands beyond Namegivers, end quote. It has always been my understanding that the status of Namegiver was a factual binary of magical origin, not an assignable social honorific. After all, when the dragons suffered the setback of the immortal elves' rebellion, they went out of their way to create the race of drakes, specifically so they could not be Namegivers, right? That doesn't support the idea that Namegiver status is determined to be by a race's ability to interact with magic on both the fundamental and creative level, and that the ability, quote, power, imagination, and will to create things by naming them, end quote, is a very exclusive club to which not just any race can belong. Thank you in advance for the clarification. Tim.
No.
And the slap back is hard. Okay.
All right. He is not wrong in terms of the quote that he is
using,
referencing from the Player's Guide. I went and looked it up before we started recording. It is in the game concepts chapter of the Player's Guide and may be a variation or slight change on what had been written about Namegivers previously. The quote in question, the power, imagination, and will to create things by naming them is what makes the races of Barsaive and lands beyond Namegivers. Nothing says that ogres don't have that.
True.
right?
To it, lawyered.
We also, in the first edition Theran Empire book, get introduced to additional Namegiver races, the Jackalmen,
Yes.
the Leafers.
Ulkmen and the Ulkmen.
Leafers and Ulkmen.
Yes.
You want to talk about weird... Ogres being name-givers doesn't seem that much of a stretch when you want to apply that sort of thing to Leafers and Ulkmen, and Jabruk, I think, are the Merakian.
I think you're right, yeah.
It doesn't seem too much of a stretch. It also comes into a... trying to think of how best to put this. The other thing that kind of idea of it being a binary state comes up against issues of essentialism, of the idea that other races are lesser because of some inherent quality that is supposedly lacking in them or some other aspect. And certainly not to imply at all that Tim is falling into that thinking, except perhaps within the framework of how it has been presented traditionally by the peoples of Earthdawn within the framework of Earthdawn. But it carries some, at least for me, some rather unpleasant connotations and consequences that would come about as a result of thinking about that.
Okay.
Like the idea in a sense that, orcs were made to be a slave race. That is their inherent nature. And I hope using that as an example kind of leads you down the path of how that can get difficult when you start applying it without consideration.
Yeah, fair.
So nothing says that ogres don't have that capability, really. It's simply the fact that there are not player character stats for playing an ogre. We've talked about that in a previous show.
Yep.
Somebody had a question about that. And that they don't really have much of a culture in the sense that the dwarves or the elves or the Tiskrang or the orcs or any other of the player character races have. And so it is only within that context, that greater context, that you kind of need to look at it and say, well, why is it that we might not consider the ogres to be a name giver? We don't know. There actually is not a definitive answer one way or the other. And I much prefer to think about it as something that is presented and thought of within the cultural milieu of Barsaive, within the fictional universe of that, rather than being something that is definitively stated ex nihilo by the books themselves. So that's part one that I want to address.
Gotcha.
The other part is what he's talking about there with drakes. I don't know where he might be getting the idea that drakes are not name givers. The thing that the dragons did when they created drakes was to create a servitor race, or to create servants that were not capable of reproduction.
Yes, I was going to...
They would remain reliant upon their dragon masters. That they would not end up reproducing and becoming more numerous, where they might potentially have the numbers and the power to overthrow their masters. That's what the dragons were trying to prevent. It doesn't have anything to do with their ability to be name givers. And so I wouldn't have an issue with drakes being considered name givers. I mean, drakes show every indication of being name givers, both by being part dragon and part dwarf, human, elf, name giver, whatever.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of assumptions that are being made within the framework of the question that I don't agree with as initial premises.
Yeah. Well, and drakes also do not have player character stats.
Right. Not as such.
Yeah. So
there is advice about playing drakes in the original first edition book.
Perhaps.
Hey, if you want to have a high-powered game, drakes are a great way to do it.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, there's no player character stats for drakes. There's no player character stats for ogres, but they're not name givers yet.
I wouldn't even go that far.
That's what I was trying to...
I would say What does it mean to be a name giver, and what evidence do you have that these things do not meet those qualifications?
Mm-hmm. Fair.
And it's the second part of that where we run into the issues. What evidence do we have that ogres are not name givers? Well, they don't appear to have any real culture, and the other peoples of Barsaive kind of look down on them as being stupid and brutish and
less than
and not name givers. Well, that's the perception of these quote unquote civilized people towards another culture. And we've seen that before.
Yep.
And the same for the drakes. What evidence is there that the drakes are not name givers? Define your terms and then find the evidence. For myself, and it's possible there may be stuff in earlier editions that I'm not recalling off the top of my head, but for myself, at least, dealing with ogres and drakes and other peoples from other parts of the world as people, and that for me, big part of being a name giver is being a person, which is kind of broad and starts to get a little bit squirrely when you start talking about spirits and naga and manticores and other
sentient things.
Yeah, other kinds of sapient beings, obviously creatures that can communicate to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
Spirits may not be name givers because of their nature as spirits and the fact that they can't name themselves. They have to have a name put upon them by someone else, but there are always exceptions.
Yeah. So
there we go.
If you think therefore you are, I don't know.
Good questions, Tim. Good topic for me to wax philosophical for a bit.
I was going to rhapsodize, and I got half the word out.
No, just for me to talk a little bit about some of the thinking that goes on.
Oh, yeah, it's a wonderful philosophical discussion. So there ought to be. Josh and I are planning on writing a 3-book volume later on called the philosophy of philosophy of Earthdawn. I'm kidding, absolutely kidding. Anyway,
one other thing that I want to mention here before we get started.
We're 15
by the
minutes
time
in.
this drops,
yes,
it will have already happened. But I do want to mention it if somehow people who are listening to this were not aware.
No.
We've got a new Kickstarter going on.
There you go.
The latest book. It's been a while. It has been quite a while since we've had new product that has been ready to go. We just recently launched the Kickstarter for Vasgothia. This is a book that was headed up by Kyle and written by freelancer Nick Lowe. It is a book that is focused on the Theran province of the same name, exploring and expanding the information sort of from the original first edition book. Lots of cool stretch goals that are involved there, including one that's way kind of at the top. Because one of the features of Vasgothia are the towers that are kind of at the eastern end of that area, which are these big, like, horror-corrupted kind of weird things that just exist, but have, like, a whole bunch of levels of dangerous traps and all sorts of things. We're looking at as a stretch goal of having a netbook, an electronic book, where people who decide to buy this add-on get to design a level of one of the towers, and we'll have like a 48-page ebook of these various fan contributions.
Cool. Kickstarter, at least.
Go to Kickstarter, look up Vasgothia. If you have backed any of the previous Kickstarters from us, it's under the Facet Games heading. We're glad
just type in
to finally
Earthdawn into Kickstarter and find it.
Yeah, we're glad to finally have a new book to have ready. Oh, also included in this Kickstarter is the print version of Champions Challenge Volume 2. That is the
there you go.
Comic graphic novel that has been worked on here by Dawn, continuing the story of our Tiskrang friend and the things that have been going on there. Lots of cool stuff. Go check that out.
Absolutely. I will be doing so because I want Champions Challenge Volume 2. And Vasgothia, because I get everything, so might as well. Anywho, on to our dragon topic of the evening, we have the Mistress of the Mist Swamps, the youngest of the great dragons, Aban, otherwise known as Mistweaver.
Yeah. I like her.
Not quite the garbage person that Alaki is, but Josh is
far from it.
No. Exactly. There's only one Alakia in Josh's heart. We know where she resides. Otherwise, Aban is the one who has taken up residence and lairs in the Mist Swamps. That is her domain. Yes. Enter there at your peril. She suffers no fools and does not grant an audience. No. So
she is similar in some regards to Usun in that she is very insular, very protective of her domain, very mysterious, does not suffer encroachment on her territory.
No.
Is a little bit different in that she does not quite follow the same hardcore dragon superiority aspects that Usun does. Although she does carry some of that idea as a result of who her clutch holder, who her tutor was, the great dragon Cloudtamer, who was very strong and vicious and very in line with the draconic ideals of survival of the most fit. And the fact that Aban was female did not give her any slack when it came to facing up to the lessons of her mentor in that regard.
No. Yes.
In fact, not only is she the youngest, she is also the only female great dragon counted among the great dragons of Barsaive. Divilgainen is female as well, but is not one of Barsaive's greats.
Not so much, no. But she is somewhat of a contradiction in her attitudes, because she claims to dislike all the Namegivers, but she doesn't slay most of them that come into the Mist Swamps. She tends to turn them around, unless they're Therans. In that case, you're done, and you're a nice tasty little snack. And she also agrees with the rest of the Dragon Council to non-interference, but she did help during the Theran War, so she's I can't say hot-headed or inconsistent, but like any personality, like any of the rest of us, you can find your line to go, I won't do this, except for this one little case over here. Or, this is my hard line in the sand I won't cross, but now we need to cross it. So, she's a little contradictory, but which is fine.
Yeah, that is absolutely
She's
fine.
a well-rounded character that way.
Yes. In contrast to Usun does not have, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Vast Green, Usun does not really have plots or involvement or anything like that for the most part outside of his domain. He's got his lair, he hunts there, he kind of deals with the other dragons, but for the most part completely keeps to himself. Aban puts up that same front, but it is very clear from the original essay about her in the Old Dragons book that she is a lot more involved, but secretly involved in the affairs of things and what's going on in Barsaive.
More like a puppet mistress behind the scenes. She doesn't declare her intentions. She doesn't on purpose broadcast what she's going to do. She just has movers and shakers and parts and chess pieces in play at all times, like, all the rest of the dragons do, whether they admit it or not, especially Outcast, being that he is. But yes, she is the last of the great dragons born and is the only one not born during the age of dragons. Well, the Barsaive dragons, at least. The rest of the world, we don't know. But yeah, to Josh's point, Cloudtamer was a very harsh, violent, brash, physical sire, and he instilled in her that females must be stronger than the males to carry their eggs and protect the eggs. So he absolutely drilled her like a drill sergeant in the military. You need to be strong, and she is absolutely a physical fighter in that mode. But don't think for a second that her magical talents are not up to snuff.
She is a physical fighter. The Outcast mentions that only Mountain Shadow is larger than her, which
yes,
I
physically
think maybe contradicts a little bit of what he might have said about Usun. I don't remember that specifically at this point. But she is large, and she is physically formidable, as a dragon should be.
Yeah.
But she does not have the ferocity of temperament, or has a different ferocity of temperament compared to Usun. There's going to be a lot of comparisons to Aban and Usun in this because they are so similar in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
But she is also, as the youngest, very aware of her position and very keen on making sure that the other greats do not discount her, and is very attentive to draconic rituals and rites and so forth, because it is a way that she can ensure that she is getting the respect she feels she is due without necessarily crossing that line into offending the other dragons.
Yeah, she knows that she's the young upstart, and young in air quotes, the young upstart, and
only 2,000 years old.
Only. Should I be so lucky? But knowing she's the young upstart, she also knows that she doesn't have the respect inherent because of her age, and her experience is less. So she knows that. So she's playing the game and giving as much deference and ritual as possible so that she's following their rules so that she can be heard. Because if you don't follow those rules and you don't follow those customs, they're going to be even more dismissive of you because you just don't get it, youngin'. But she knows how to play the game, and she is playing the game with the Dragon Council. And so, she's just waiting for that seat at the table to be taken ever more seriously. And dare I say, there's a smidge of sexism in there because she's also a woman. She's also the female great dragon. Yeah. Or is it just her age?
That is certainly an approach that you could take. I don't get that impression either from the Outcast or from Mountain Shadow in the commentary that he has in the essay.
Agreed.
I don't get the sense from either of them that they discount her or think lesser of her because Aban is female. It's possible that the others maybe.
Yeah.
Dragon society does not strike me as one that is in particularly sexist or misogynistic in that regard.
Yeah, which is fair. I wanted to put it out there that we could discount it.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an angle that if you are going to be really exploring their relationships between the dragons, it is certainly something that could be a factor between individual dragons and their relationship perhaps with Aban.
But not the whole council and not as a society.
But it does not seem to me, from the information that we have about the great dragons and dragon society in general, as presented to us through Vast and Jass's essays and so forth, that it does not seem to be something that is structural or systemic in terms of how things work. I think there is a recognition and there is a long enough tradition within dragon society of female dragons being just as capable as the males. More so.
Yes. And I just want to state, because if we want to, I can take all that 5 minutes out, that Earthdawn, as it's presented in its entirety, we've gone through almost all of the books, and first edition to now, there is no, that I can find, sexism in there in any way. All the orcs are treated equally, male and female. All the societies that are run don't make a big deal if it's woman in charge, man in charge, doesn't matter a whole lot. So there doesn't seem to be a whole lot. There's no sexism that I can find in Earthdawn as a whole.
I want to break that down into two levels. You're not wrong. I think if you take a step back and look at it from a developer point of view, if you look at it from the point of view of the people who were working on the game and the people like Lou who was guiding it, and freelancers like Robin Laws and Steve Kenson and Carl Sargent and various other folks that worked on products over the years.
Yes.
I think it's fairly clear, at least to me, admittedly from my own position of privilege and experience, I do not recognize any kind of inherent sexism or misogyny sort of within the line as a whole if we take a look at it.
Yeah.
But it is certainly possible, and I think realistic for there perhaps to be cultures or societies or places within the setting where that might be the case. Generally speaking, there are plenty of strong female characters.
Absolutely.
You know, you've got Krathis Gron, you've got the matriarchal society of the Tiskrang with the Shivalahalas. You've got Selenda in the Kingdom of Thrall, who is one of the high-ranking courtiers and a massive thorn in the side of Varulus and Nedin.
Yes. And let's not forget the Bloodwood and Alakia and all of her
Alakia.
glory.
And we can go through and plenty of examples.
And that's just
Teresia
not even researching.
And Jada Denerastus. I mean, we could list all of these really cool, rich, complex, varied female characters that are within the setting and use that as, hey, there is a certain amount of variety here and at least some indication, while it might not necessarily have always been perfect, that the people working on things were trying. And we kind of try to continue that. But there are also, I'm sure, examples of characters who were awful people. The idea that just because we have a character that expresses an opinion or a philosophy, that does not necessarily mean that we condone it. And usually in cases where we don't, we try to indicate that we think they're wrong or that they are villains or bad guys or antagonists in some respect.
Yeah.
So that's the situation here in kind of our sidebar discussion about
equality,
gender politics within Earthdawn and Dragon Society.
Yeah. But no, I from day one, I have always applauded that Earthdawn just never seemed to bring up inequality among the sexes. So I was quite happy with that, still am, and very, very much in favor of that. So yes, I just wanted to point out that it is a judgment against Aban due to her youth only, that the other dragons don't have the same respect for her because she is just the youngin, 2,000 years old and whatnot. And that's pretty much it. So it's age only, inexperience only, we're good.
Dragon Society is... They may not have the sexism and misogyny, but they've got their own problems. They've got their own gerontocracy going on.
Ooh, good word. There you go. So yeah, she does lair in the Mist Swamps, and she has claimed that domain as her own, and she's so connected to it. But I think the secret is that she's guarding the lost city of Yrns Morgath, right? Did I say that right? Yrns Morgath?
That's how I pretty much say it, Yrns Morgath.
Yeah, I hadn't come across it in a while.
It gets mentioned multiple times across various books to the point that it's fairly clear that, this is actually the case.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know much about it. Not much is presented within the books as far as what it is, aside from a city from the previous Age of Magic.
Yes.
It is either from the previous Age of Magic or one of the earliest cities from the current Age of Magic. So old and forgotten. I'm more inclined to think that it is
in ruins,
even older than that it's the previous age. And certainly some things in the Aban essay kind of hint that that is the case as well. What purpose it served, what it was, what its connection to everything is unknown.
Exactly.
But it is clearly important to some degree because of Aban's protection of it and also because of the Theran interest in it.
Yes. I do believe the Outcast rumors, or at least is either seeding the rumor, spreading the rumor, or confirming the rumor that she actually has the remains of the Theran elf hero Naaman Eros in her lair, and that they want his body back because maybe there's the possibility of resurrecting him. And
that is one of the ideas. So there is a cult, there's a living legend cult that is dedicated to tracking down and finding the body of Naaman Eros and possibly bringing them back to life. There is a whole chapter devoted to them in the first edition book Secret Societies of Barsaive.
Which we'll get to in a couple of podcasts.
Which we'll cover in the future.
Yeah.
Naaman Eros is one of those things that pops up multiple times within first edition materials.
Yeah.
There's always kind of been a presence there. I have not gone back and done the research yet, but clearly a figure of significant legendary importance.
Mm-hmm.
The reasons for which I'm not sure of offhand. I'm not even sure if it is really detailed beyond the idea that he was just this legendary Theran hero and people want him back for reasons that are not completely known.
Entirely.
The Outcast speculates that the reason that the Therans are so interested in Yrns Morgath and the reason that Aban is so dead set on keeping them and everybody else out is because she has Naaman's remains there in her lair in the city, and that she is doing that to prevent the Therans from bringing him back, because Aban hates the Therans.
Because the Therans killed her sire.
Yes.
Outright.
Killed Cloudtamer.
Yes. Killed Cloudtamer because he thought he was big and bad, and they specifically targeted him on purpose.
Yes.
And were able to take him down.
If you go way back early in the podcast, we were talking about the history of the setting. One of the things that happened early in the sort of period of time when the Therans were starting to spread the rights of protection and passage, they targeted 3 dragons. We learn in this essay that Cloudtamer was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
We know that Icewing was a second one. I don't remember off the top of my head whether the third one is actually mentioned or not.
I don't think so.
But anyway, Cloudtamer was one of them and was killed by the Therans. Mountain Shadow does lament the fact that Cloudtamer is dead, because Cloudtamer was a vicious fighter and his presence might have changed things or might change how things play out in current events, sort of as of the essays in the original book.
Yeah, I can't find the third dragon.
I don't recall off the top of my head, but Icewing was one of the 3 and got away, and we'll get to that here another time.
Yes, Icewing's coming up soon. We'll get there.
The Outcast is cagey about what he thinks the Theran's purpose might be for Naaman Eros.
Yeah.
And speculates that what's going on are the dragons being petty to the Therans because of the Theran connections with the immortal elves and the general antagonism between the dragons and the Therans that goes back a long, long way.
Mm-hmm.
And Mountain Shadow didn't know this or doesn't necessarily believe it, and in his commentary asks Aban, hey, if this is what's going on, can you at least tell us so that we know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because you can do your own thing, that's okay, but this is kind of a big deal, and if it's true, it kind of sucks that we had to hear it from the Outcast rather than hearing it from you.
Yes. And it's also one of those, let me find the phrase. I've got the phrase. Why is it one's friends will believe one's lies, but one's enemies are incapable of recognizing the truth when one speaks it? Just reminds me of, so we're going to believe the Outcast's truth. Lies, maybe? Because it's the Outcast. Do we really trust that he's telling the entire truth the entire time?
We don't know. As so many things in Earthdawn are.
Yeah.
The truth is not clearly defined. They give themselves an out in the sense that the Outcast is saying one thing, Mountain Shadow is not confirming it.
Yeah.
But also at the same time going, it's possible, we don't know, and if so, it's kind of a big deal. And I always kind of felt like there were ideas and plans in place, at least the amount of attention that Naaman Yrns gets within Earthdawn products, particularly within the latter source books, gets a call out here, gets an entire write-up for the Living Legend cult in Secret Societies, gets mentioned and brought up in a couple of other places as well, makes it feel like there were plans there, maybe. But I also know that at least from the outlines and notes and so forth that were left at the tail end, that there wasn't anything really in place for that to come into play. It always felt like one of those things that was there as a potential hook, as a potential thing to get picked up down the road if it tied into something cool, or possibly, who knows?
Yeah. It's a nice little dangling plot thread that, may dangle forever. Who knows? Never can tell. So we've gone through what most of the dragons look like. Again, Troggrogrin is kind of the enigma on that one. Unfortunately, Aban, in her magical prowess, is able to disguise herself at whim, and does so quite often, so you never quite know if it's the same dragon or not, because her coloration in one writing in the Great Library of Thrall is described as having scales the deep red of old blood and eyes as black as the midnight sky, while another tome paints a picture of her with greenish-black scales and unsettling yellow eyes. And when Outcast knew her, her scales were a glossy black that ran with subtle hints of deep blue, while her eyes were the clear blue of the long frozen ice at the tops of mountains. So she changes her appearance as often as she wants. So she's never quite the same looking dragon that anybody else is. So she'll never look the same way twice.
I suspect that there's probably some illusion magic that is at play there that ties in to her ability to vanish into the mist swamps, to disguise herself, to camouflage herself so effectively within that area, and her ability to change her appearance and coloration only enhances that capability.
Yeah.
Although the one common aspect of all of those descriptions is that they are all very dark in color. The Outcast remembers her as black. The one writing has the greenish black scales. One, another one has the deep red of old blood. So again, a very dark color. So I think that's sort of maybe a consistent aspect of it, is that the coloration, at least for her primary scales, is always kind of on the darker end of things.
Yeah, she's not going to show up as a bright yellow anytime soon. Just saying.
She's not like Vast Green, who is jade, emerald.
Yeah.
She is a much more misty and gothic dragon.
Yeah, she's that kind of chick. Anyway, just saying. But again, she is, just because she's a physical presence and she learned from Cloudtamer to be as well, solve things physically, doesn't mean she's a slouch in the magic department. Even though she's only had been working for magic for like 2,000 years or so, she does have a level of mastery of elemental magic, elemental summoning, and control of those elementals, and also the ability to summon spirits, elementals, great form spirits. She's kind of got it all going on, magically speaking. So she's not as adept as the other great dragons, but still, she probably knows more about those magics.
But in her area of expertise, she is
grade A number 1?
Yeah. She is just as capable. She just doesn't necessarily have quite the practical experience that some of the other dragons have in terms of having a breadth of abilities and tricks to pull from.
She's been able to work her elemental magic so deeply into the mist swamps that all of the creatures, all of the spirits, all of her servants, all of the terrain, the mist itself when the water turns to steam, all of that she can control. So she can make it harder for you to breathe just by condensing the air. She can make it easier to breathe or raise the temperature, lower the temperature. She can control everything within the boundaries of the mist swamps because it is all of that is her eyes and her ears. Every insect, every reptile, every bird, every tree, doesn't matter. She controls it all. And in fact, the Outcast rumors that her powers, not only her lair sense, can now travel up the Serpent River itself out of the mist swamps. So, she's no slouch.
And that continues the tradition of the dragons of Earthdawn being as much an environmental hazard and threat as physical one in the presence. And we saw this sort of most iconically otherwise with Usun, again, to bring that comparison back, with his control and influence over the Liage jungle. We don't get quite the same sense of things with Charcoal Grin. Charcoal Grin is not a great dragon.
Yes.
Earthroot does have a great amount of influence over his territory underneath the Thrall Mountains. But these are dragons that are so closely tied with the area that they claim as their domain that it makes those areas, like the presence of the dragon is felt even when the dragon isn't necessarily right there.
Yeah.
And that's something that if you have player characters that are going to be venturing into the mist swamps for some reason, you want to focus on that and play up that paranoia and unsettling sense of the land itself, the environment rising up against you.
Yes, I think more so to a larger degree than most, because the mist swamps is already so inherently dangerous territory. Quicksand and steam and fog and just
one of the places that you might look for some inspiration in terms of how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
Look into Swamp Thing, the comics.
Oh, I love Swamp Thing.
Especially when you get into some of the more mystical, Alan Moore connected and inspired stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's really dealing with some of the cosmic aspects of the green and the things that can be done kind of as a result of that can really serve as some inspiration for stuff that you might be able to do with the mist swamps and Aban's presence and influence within them.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. So we should talk real quick. She does actually have a couple of servants because, again, she has this mastery of elemental magic, and she has numerous elementals watching her lair, the ruins of Yrns Morgath. She's got a bunch of named servants out there as well, and even a couple of great form spirits that she's negotiated with. So, again, no slouch. She only has one drake that the Outcast knows of, and that is Saverin, which is a name I absolutely love. And Saverin is not her drake. She didn't create him. Cloudtamer created Saverin before his death, and Saverin is also of the warrior discipline.
And but as strong and vicious and physical as his creator.
Yes.
As his sire was.
Yes, and he has chosen to follow her because most of the time Saverin believes that Mistweaver, Aban, does follow in Cloudtamer's footsteps, figuratively speaking, on how to resolve things. But here's the question. So this is where Outcast has a little bit of Mountain Shadow kind of pushed back a little bit on Outcast's essay, which was the Castle of Assassins. Is it a part of the Hand of Corruption, or?
Well, the Castle of Assassins is part of the Hand of Corruption. I think the part that Mountain Shadow pushes back on is that the Outcast makes an understandable, logical connection.
Yes.
Comes to a conclusion that makes sense. That being, the Castle of Assassins is within the Mist Swamps. Mm-hmm. The northern edge, but still within the area that's considered the Mist Swamps.
Yeah.
Aban does not tolerate anybody who does not serve her to be within the Mist Swamps.
Yeah, suffers no intruders. Yes.
Yeah.
She condones these people.
So if they are there, then she must condone them, ergo they must serve her.
Mm-hmm.
Mountain Shadow pushes back on that hard. He's like, oh, well, at least we know that his information isn't perfect because he's wrong about this.
Mm-hmm.
That the Hand of Corruption is a blight, and maybe it's a good thing that he's directing his people to look at them as servants of the dragons because they might deal with each other and cause each other problems, and that's a good thing because whatever. I don't have any reason to doubt Mountain Shadow here. I don't have any reason to not believe that Mountain Shadow is telling the truth with this. We need to understand within the framework of these essays.
Yes.
Who the audience is, who is being spoken to. Mountain Shadow is speaking to the other great dragons. We're getting that insight. This is not a book that is in the Great Library with Mountain Shadow's commentary.
Yes.
This portion of the book, the portion talking about the various great dragons, are the essays by the Outcast talking about his adversaries, his rivals within the great dragons, for his servants so that they know what's going on. Mountain Shadow's commentary is intended for the other great dragons saying, here's what he is revealing about us, here is what he knows, and here are my thoughts on it. And so there is no reason for him to lie in this. It's possible that he is mistaken. It's absolutely possible that he is mistaken, but he seems too sure of himself here and is addressing the other dragon saying, maybe they'll deal with each other, which is kind of a good thing because really they need to be dealt with.
Yeah.
The other thing that he hints at, and this is, again, why I don't have any reason to not believe Mountain Shadow's commentary here, and that is that he says he's wrong, which is a good thing, because it means we know his information gathering isn't perfect, and that he can also be wrong, because he found all of the clues that would allow him to figure out who her actual servants are, and he didn't. He doesn't say who they are because everybody else knows who they are.
Of course.
Everybody that he's talking to knows who they are.
Yeah, he knows his audience.
He knows, the other great dragons know, we the readers don't necessarily know, but we know that all the clues are there.
Yes. And that's a fun mystery.
Yeah, and this was one of the great unrevealed secrets of the tail end of first edition. And should I?
Yeah, do it.
Okay.
First edition stopped being published 20 years ago. This is not necessarily a spoiler.
Yeah. Well.
Uh-huh.
I know what the answer is. I actually know what it is. And I think it's possible. I've talked about it elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
The servants that Mountain Shadow is referring to here, Aban's servants, is House Hengyoke.
Oh, okay.
That's why she seems to have the ability to exert her will outside
up and down the
on the Serpent River.
Yeah. Gotcha.
The torques that they have, the condition of the House Hengyoke is basically the result of magical influence of the dragon being able to be exerted at a distance.
Gotcha.
House Hengyoke, if you go back and you read the old first edition Serpent River book, and I think it's probably repeated in the third Serpent River book.
Could be.
2 entire foundations of House Contention vanished during the Scourge.
Yeah.
And House Hengyoke didn't appear until after the Scourge.
Mm-hmm.
The Outcast talks about how Aban will take action when she's decided she's going to do something, she does it.
Yes.
The very strong implication is that she went and she abducted. You want to talk about dragons not being good guys. You want to talk about dragons not being nice. She went and abducted hundreds of Tiskrang out from their safety during the Scourge and has basically shaped them to her will and is using them as her eyes and ears along the Serpent River and causing problems. That's the situation there.
Cool.
That's the truth.
All right. With Aban and everything we've gone through and her lair and the storylines in there, how would anyone, game master or otherwise, how could they include Aban in any kind of campaign?
Kind of similar to Usun. Aban is not a dragon who is going to very easily be wrapped up into any kind of campaign. You're going to largely be dealing with Aban mostly if you are dealing with the mist swamps in the surrounding area to some extent.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're going to be dealing with the Theran Empire and their interest in the mist swamps, anything that kind of deals with that area and the things that can be found there could potentially involve Aban.
Or the Castle of Assassins.
Yeah, if you're dealing with the Hand of Corruption, then you could potentially be involving Aban if you're going to be dealing with the Castle of Assassins in any capacity. Not because they serve her, but because they're in that area. Unless you decide that Mountain Shadow was mistaken and they do in fact serve her, which would be really interesting. You want to go and study up on them and kind of figure out how their philosophy and so forth, if they do in fact have the backing of a dragon, why their philosophy is shaped the way that it is.
Yeah.
You're going to be dealing with her mist swamps, dealing with her with the Therans. She would be, if you're dealing with a game, particularly a sort of an earlier set game around the Second Theran War or the time leading up to it, is largely going to involve her a little bit more one way or the other. Unlike Usun, who doesn't want to have anything to do with Namegivers at all, she does not have that kind of superiority complex. She just doesn't want people getting close to her lair, getting into her territory. But she doesn't have any problems, it seems, dealing with, perhaps through intermediaries, but having agents and servants and so forth working for her in other areas, particularly in the south reach of the Serpent River, where she probably would work against House Katention, at least in their traditional alliance with the Theran Empire, perhaps supporting Travar a little bit in their attempts to hold off House Katention influence, things like that. That's the sort of thing that you would have her involved in. And obviously, if you're dealing with any kind of broader scale thing with the Second Theran War or greater dragon politics involving the outcast and things being done against Iopos, with her interest to a certain extent with elemental magic and the Serpent River and whatnot, there's stuff kind of going on there. She probably would have agents, even if only sort of intelligence gathering type agents within House Decambris.
And Josh would be finishing that thought had our internet actually been able to maintain its connection. We had a 5-hour outage between the two of us, so we couldn't talk over the internet anymore, and so Josh's thought has to end there. So we will wrap this episode up, and with that being said, I had one thought while going through the editing of this episode, and thought that maybe Aban's coloration, being all dark colors every time you meet her, is her being in mourning over the death of Cloudtamer still all these years later. But that was just a random thought. Anyway, if you have any questions for us, contact us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. If you'd like to hear the rest of Josh's thoughts on anything we didn't cover for Aban and how to work her into a campaign, please do so. Get a hold of us that way. And otherwise, folks, it is time for you to not let the internet crash your legend.